getting some breaking news in the investigation into the disappearance of Nancy.
Because on March 10th, something happened in the Nancy Guthrie case that no one in that room was prepared for. A press conference was called, routine on the surface, but the atmosphere inside felt anything but normal. The air was tight. Reporters lined the walls, cameras fixed, microphones angled forward, everyone waiting for something, anything, to break the silence that had defined this case for weeks. And then he leaned in, the man at the center of it all, the man who hadn't said a single word since the night Nancy disappeared. He adjusted the microphone, looked up, and spoke just 4 words. I was there that night, and somewhere behind me, someone audibly gasped. Not subtle, not controlled, a real involuntary reaction, because what we were witnessing didn't match the man we had come to know. This was someone who had shut everyone out. Reporters, detectives, even the public. He refused them all. No interviews, no statements. When questioned, he lawyered up instantly, invoked the Fifth Amendment, and disappeared behind silence while an 84-year-old woman, someone he was connected to, someone he was expected to protect, vanished from her own home. For weeks, nothing. And now suddenly he was speaking. But what came next made it worse. Because just as the room started to stir, just as whispers began to ripple through the crowd, he leaned forward again and added 3 more words. She was not alone. And just like that, the entire narrative shattered. Up until that exact moment, this case had been framed as something contained. One man, one missing woman, a closed circle. But those 3 words tore that idea apart. They introduced something else, someone else. And suddenly, what felt like a mystery turned into something far more dangerous. But before we unpack what happened inside that room, before we get into what investigators started uncovering after that statement, you need to understand who Nancy Guthrie really is. Because reducing her to a headline misses everything that matters. Nancy is 84 years old. Not just a number, but a life filled with decades of history. She's a mother, a grandmother, the kind of woman who never missed a birthday, who filled kitchens with the smell of fresh cookies, who sat in the same church pew every Sunday, like clockwork. She spent years working as a university administrator, quietly building a life, raising 5 children, holding everything together even when things got hard. And when her husband died, she didn't fall apart. She adapted. She kept moving forward. Because that's who she was. Yes, she had a pacemaker. Her heart needed a little help staying steady. But everything else about her? Unshakable, strong, present, fully alive. She lived in Tucson, Arizona, in a neighborhood that was familiar, predictable, safe, or at least it was supposed to be. It was her routine, her world, her peace, until the night of February 1st, 2026. Because that was the night everything broke. February 1st didn't begin as anything unusual for Nancy. It looked ordinary, quiet, predictable. But somewhere between the morning calm and the desert sunset over Tucson, something inside that house began to unravel, and by nightfall, whatever had shifted would leave her family with questions they may never escape. At exactly 7:12 p.m., a food delivery pulled up to Nancy's front door. 2 meals. Not 1, 2. And that detail, small on the surface, would later feel anything but accidental. The order wasn't placed from Nancy's phone. It came from her son-in-law's account, Tommaso Cayan, and he was already inside the house when it arrived. Neighbors would later say they saw his car parked in the driveway around 6:30 that evening. Not a quick visit, not a drop-in. Phone records would confirm it. He had been there for a while. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. When the delivery driver knocked, the door opened slowly. He told investigators the man standing there didn't look relaxed. His jaw was clenched, his eyes unfocused, like his attention was somewhere else entirely. And behind him, faint but clear enough, was a woman's voice. Not shouting, not panicked, just talking. But something about the entire interaction stayed with him. Enough that later that night, he brought it up to his girlfriend, said the whole thing felt wrong, off in a way he couldn't explain. Then at 7:40 p.m., Nancy's home phone dialed her attorney's office. It didn't connect. It went straight to voicemail. But what was left behind, what investigators managed to recover, was enough to raise alarms. The message was fragmented, incomplete, but the words that survived were sharp and deliberate. Important change. Not comfortable. Tomorrow. That was it. So what was she trying to say? Was this about her will? Her finances? Or was it about Tommaso? Investigators would later come to a chilling conclusion, possibly all of it. Because something the public didn't know at the time was this. Nancy already had a meeting scheduled with her attorney on February 3rd, just 2 days later. And she wasn't going in for something routine. She was planning to make changes. Real changes. The kind that shift power. The kind that cut people out. Sources say she intended to reduce Tommaso's financial control. To strip back the authority he had over her accounts. To reconsider the power of attorney he'd been holding over her life. And the most unsettling part? Tommaso knew about that meeting. He knew what was coming. Now focus closely on the stretch of time between 8:42 p.m. and 9:03 p.m. because everything seems to collapse into that window. At 8:20, neighbors reported hearing voices coming from inside Nancy's home. Not screaming, but louder than normal. Noticeably tense. And for Nancy, that alone was unusual. She wasn't confrontational. She wasn't loud. Something had escalated. At 8:31, Tommaso's phone lit up with a call. 14 seconds long. That's it. The number wasn't saved. No name. No history. Investigators would later trace it back to a prepaid phone. The kind you buy anonymously. Cash. No records. And here's the part that makes it harder to ignore. That phone had been purchased just 3 days earlier. February 1st wasn't random. It was approaching. 14 seconds doesn't sound like much, but it's enough. Enough to deliver a message. Enough to confirm timing. Enough to say something like, "Are you ready?" Or "It's time." Or what happens next. We may never know the exact words, but what followed that call speaks louder than anything that could have been said. At 8:42 p.m., Nancy's pacemaker registered something sudden. Not gradual. Not natural. Her heart rhythm spiked abruptly. The kind of shift medical experts associate with fear or pain. Then just 5 minutes later, at 8:47, the device recorded intense physical movement. Not small adjustments. Not routine motion. Something sharp. Something forceful. And whatever happened in those minutes, it didn't stop there. Not walking. Not sitting. Not anything ordinary. The data showed something violent. An abrupt shift, like her body was forced into motion without warning. Then at 8:52 p.m., the pacemaker registered what doctors later described as an acute cardiac crisis. Her heart wasn't just elevated, it was failing, struggling in real time. And then, at exactly 9:03 p.m., the signal vanished. Completely. Not a low battery. Not a glitch. The device didn't fail, someone removed it. Physically, 11 minutes. That's all it took. From the first sign of distress to total silence. And in those 11 minutes, no one dialed 911. No ambulance. No attempt to save her. Just nothing. Now here's what didn't dominate headlines early on, but immediately caught investigators' attention. There were zero signs of forced entry. No broken locks. No shattered glass. No damaged doors. Whoever was inside that house that night didn't break in. They were allowed in, welcomed, trusted, and that changes everything. Nancy's small dog was discovered the next morning, inside the house, calm, not hiding, not panicked. Anyone who knows dogs understands. They react to strangers. They bark, they pace, they sense tension. But with familiar people, it's different. A neighbor later recalled hearing the dog barking around 8:45 p.m. and then suddenly going quiet. Not gradually, instantly, like someone it knew had given a quiet command, and it obeyed. And then there's the garage. Days before Nancy vanished, the garage door had been adjusted to a very precise position. Not fully shut, not open, just low enough to interfere with the driveway camera's line of sight. Subtle, intentional. When Tommaso was questioned about it early on, he brushed it off, said it was to block sunlight. But detectives weren't convinced, because later, when the security cameras themselves were found destroyed, something became clear. This wasn't random damage. Whoever did it knew exactly where those cameras were. They understood the blind spots. They had already mapped out what could be seen and what couldn't. Then at 9:34 p.m., during that critical gap between the pacemaker going dark and the moment an SUV was seen leaving the driveway, something else happened. Nancy's home Wi-Fi logged connection to the security system. The correct password was entered. No guessing. No failed attempts. Immediate access. The cameras were shut off remotely before being physically destroyed. That means whoever did it didn't just have access. They had knowledge. And Nancy wasn't someone who casually shared passwords. She was careful, private, deliberate. When investigators began asking questions, Tommaso's response was immediate and noticeable. He hired an attorney, refused to speak, declined interviews, ignored reporters, and with every question from law enforcement, he leaned on the same shield, the Fifth Amendment. Silence became his strategy, and it stayed that way for weeks. Now some will argue, that's just legal caution, a smart move. You don't talk without representation. That's your right, and that's true. But context matters, because while he stayed silent, Nancy's family was doing the exact opposite. Savannah Guthrie, her daughter, a familiar face to millions, stood in front of cameras, visibly shaken, pleading for her mother to come home. Her voice cracked. Her eyes filled. This wasn't performance. This was real. The family put up a $100,000 reward. Her siblings spoke out. They searched, organized, pushed, did everything families do when someone they love disappears without a trace. And Tommaso? Nothing. No statement. No support. No presence. He didn't stand beside them. Didn't join a single search. Didn't say her name publicly. A man living just 15 minutes away from the house, where she vanished, chose silence. And that silence didn't go unnoticed. One Tucson resident summed up what many were already thinking. My gut is telling me it's the brother-in-law. You hadn't seen him. You hadn't heard a single word from him. Just silence. Complete, deliberate silence. And to a lot of people watching this unfold, that silence didn't feel neutral. It felt calculated, suspicious. The kind that lingers in the back of your mind and refuses to go away. And that feeling, it wasn't isolated anymore. It was spreading, quietly at first, then louder, across the entire country. Then the FBI stepped in. Search warrants were signed almost immediately after. Phones, laptops, financial records, everything was pulled and combed through. Investigators started widening the lens. A masked figure appeared on nearby surveillance footage. Ransom notes surfaced, sending waves through the media, but law enforcement quickly shut that down, calling them likely scams. Noise, distractions, and through all of it, Tommaso stayed silent. Didn't respond, didn't react, nothing, until that press conference. The room that day felt different, heavy, the kind of silence that presses against your ears. Cameras locked onto a single point, a long wooden table, one man seated behind it, hands folded, his attorney positioned close, watching everything. Waiting. A reporter finally broke the stillness. Mr. Kyan, do you have anything to say about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance? Tommaso didn't answer right away. He lifted his head slowly, like the weight of it mattered. His face looked worn down, exhausted. The edges of his eyes were red, like sleep hadn't come easy. He leaned toward the microphone. Yes, he said quietly. I have something to say. For weeks, people have believed I hurt Nancy. A pause. And I was there that night. You could feel the reaction ripple through the room. Not staged. Not exaggerated. Real people hearing this for the first time after weeks of silence. He kept going. Piece by piece, he started filling in gaps. He admitted he returned to the house, confirmed there had been an argument, acknowledged that Nancy had told him she was preparing to make major changes, her will, her finances, the power of attorney. Changes that would take control away from him. He said he went there to talk, said he didn't go there to hurt her. And then he said it again. She was not alone. But here's what makes that statement even more chilling. 3 weeks before he ever opened his mouth publicly, investigators were already looking at something far more concrete. Data. Hard evidence. Nancy's cardiologist had submitted a full report, and what it showed sent a shock through the entire investigation. At 8:42 p.m., her heart rhythm spiked, sudden, severe. At 8:47, the pacemaker detected abrupt, forceful movement. At 8:52, it recorded acute distress, her heart entering a dangerous state. And at 9:03 nothing, the signal stopped. Not faded, not weakened, stopped, because the device had been physically removed. Here's what most people don't realize about pacemakers. You don't just take one out. Not by accident, not casually, and definitely not to help someone. Removing it requires force, intent, a decision. Doctors who reviewed the timeline were clear. If someone genuinely wanted to save Nancy at 8:52, there was only one logical action. Call 911, immediately, but that didn't happen. Instead, 11 minutes later, the device was removed. And investigators believe that wasn't about panic. It wasn't about confusion. It was about control. Because pacemakers don't just support the heart, they record everything. Time, rhythm, movement, distress. A perfect timeline. And the moment that device is removed, the story stops recording. If someone wanted to blur that timeline, to create uncertainty about when things actually happened, investigators went back and traced the origin of that prepaid phone, followed the purchase trail, and what they found next started pulling the second person into the light. Security footage later captured a figure at a checkout counter, baseball cap pulled low, sunglasses hiding the eyes, paying in cash. No ID, no hesitation. Slightly taller than Tommaso. Slim build, quick movements, like someone who didn't want to linger. Could that be the same masked figure spotted near Nancy's home that night? It's possible. Could it be the person on the other end of that 14-second call? Investigators believe that's far more than coincidence. Then comes the detail that tightens everything. At 10:12 p.m., right in the middle of those 9 silent minutes in the desert, Tommaso's phone briefly connected to a second Bluetooth device. Not his SUV, a different vehicle. The connection lasted just 18 seconds, but that's all it takes. Enough for 2 cars to be side by side. Enough for something or someone to be moved between them. And the prepaid phone? It pinged a tower near that same desert location at 10:05 p.m. 2 devices, 2 signals, 1 isolated stretch of desert, 1 night with no witnesses. Eventually, under pressure, Tommaso gave detectives a name, an associate. He claimed that after they reached the desert, he left and the other man stayed behind, took over. Tommaso said he drove home. Said he doesn't know what happened to Nancy after that. Investigators aren't convinced. An arrest warrant was issued, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, manslaughter. The second suspect, still under active investigation. And inside the family, everything began to fracture. Annie, Tommaso's wife, Nancy's own daughter, had stood by him in the early days, defended him, told friends she believed him completely, said he would never hurt her mother. But after that press conference, after he admitted to destroying cameras, removing the pacemaker, choosing panic over calling 911, something changed. She went quiet. Sources say she confronted him directly. No cameras, no lawyers, just one question. Who else was there? He didn't give her a clear answer. And sometimes silence inside a family speaks louder than anything said in public. Savannah Guthrie continued to release statements, measured, precise, controlled. She understands language. She knows how every word lands. She never directly accused Tommaso in public. Not once. But after details from the interrogation began to surface, her tone shifted. My mother deserves the full truth. We will not stop searching for her. There was a difference now. Less hope, more determination. And there's a line, subtle but real, between a family searching for someone and a family preparing for what they might find. Because despite everything uncovered, the pacemaker data, the blanket in the desert, the single-word text, the 4-second audio, the partial confession, Nancy Guthrie is still missing. The desert gave investigators evidence, but didn't give them her. And now, investigators believe there's another layer, that she may have been moved again. The second vehicle, the Bluetooth connection, the associate who allegedly took over. All of it suggests the final location could be somewhere else entirely. Search zones are expanding. Ground-penetrating radar is being deployed across new areas. Traffic cameras along remote desert roads from the night of February 1st are being analyzed frame by frame. And financial records are raising new questions. Unusual activity in Nancy's accounts in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Tommaso had been moving money. Quietly at first, then more aggressively. Nancy noticed. She started asking questions. And that may be where this all began. The meeting on February 3rd. The plan changes to her will. The power of attorney about to be stripped away. Control slipping. But through all of this, through every theory, every timeline, every piece of evidence, Nancy Guthrie is not just a case file. She is not a headline. She is an 84-year-old grandmother who left behind a voicemail saying she felt uncomfortable. A woman whose voice, in what may have been her final moments, whispered one word into the dark. Please. She baked cookies, showed up to church, trusted the people around her. She deserves answers. And her family deserves closure. Right now, the case is moving toward prosecution. The grand jury continues to hear testimony. The second suspect remains under investigation. The desert search is ongoing. Tommaso broke his silence, but he hasn't told the whole truth. Not yet, because somewhere out there is someone who knows exactly what happened between 9:15 and 9:41 that night. Someone who knows where Nancy is. Someone who has been watching this unfold, watching the evidence build, watching the timeline tighten. That silence cracked once, and when it cracks again, everything changes. If you have any information about Nancy Guthrie's disappearance, contact the Tucson Police Department or submit an anonymous tip through their official website. You can remain completely anonymous. And if this story stayed with you, share it. Because awareness isn't small. It matters.